We're good. Okay, next up we have Ryan Brown.
Good evening. First, I want to address the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee, Senator Fonfara, Representative Scanlon, Senator Martin, Representative Cheeseman, and esteemed members. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Ryan Brown. I'm a resident of Danbury, a teacher in Bridgeport, and I'm a member of various educational advocacy organizations. I am also a father to be, and my girlfriend is due with our baby girl on April 9th, 2021. I'm present today because I want to show my support for HB 6654, an act establishing a child tax credit against the personal income tax. Passing this bill will create a state level child tax credit modeled after the federal CTC. One aspect of this bill that I wanted to bring up, of the many aspects that were covered today, was families need to fund educational materials. It is common knowledge that Bridgeport does not get the same funding as other districts when it comes to, or equitable funding, when it comes to funding educational resources and materials such as technology and other resources that could be used both at school and at home, especially during the pandemic. Having this type of tax credit could also help fund those educational resources that are otherwise not covered by funding through educational funding like the ECS, for example. And families often they take that burden of funding their children's education and their children's educational resources when the district cannot measure up. And so that's one way that we could sort of fight the inequity that we face in our between districts. On a personal level, I am a teacher as well, so my salary also falls within that middle class category. Um, and when me and my girlfriend are discussing, things like childcare, things like, rent, things like this and that, um, childcare as well as living in the city of Connecticut is pretty expensive. And this would help us also start to raise a family. And again, this is one of those things where, one of the things that were brought up before was about working hard and all this other stuff. I'm one of those individuals. So is my girlfriend who did go to school, did get the degrees, and we're
30
still trying
seconds,
to.
sir. 30 seconds.
Thank you. And we're trying to make ends meet as well. And so this is something that will definitely help us, as well as other teachers in my position and other colleagues of mine that are in this position. One of the things that was brought up, as I said before, was that people should just work harder, find different jobs, and that they should have never made the decisions that they made to get themselves in their position. And my rebuttal to that is, why are we penalizing our children for some of these circumstances? Um, we should be able to help our children rise out of those circumstances. I have many former students who work instead of focus on their academics to help their families make ends meet. We should try to combat that so they can focus on academics to get themselves out of the circumstances that their parents and families are in. So based on that testimony and based on
3
other
minutes.
testimony,
3 minutes.
oh, sorry about that. So basically, just based on the testimony that I said and others said, I welcome you all to support this bill, HB 6654. And I really do thank you for your time, and I'm open to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I see a question from Representative Zipkus.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brown. Thank you for staying so long today. Congratulations on your new baby. Well, on your baby girl to be. It's being a parent is the most wonderful thing in the world.
Thank you. I
So
appreciate it.
I wish you much success with your baby girl. My question is, and I'm really trying to understand this, and I hope you won't mind answering it. But if this bill passes, how much money, how much cash will this put in your pocket?
So in my pocket specifically, unfortunately, I don't have the answer to that question because I'm just speaking for personal experience from where my salary is and sort of where I fall in the tax bracket. But
Mhm.
I do know that in previous years, I have had to, pay taxes, or I've had to take in less taxes during a tax refund time because of where my salary is in the tax bracket.
Mhm.
And I know that this would definitely help combat that cost if we allow for this to be passed.
Mm. And I understand because I work 2 full-time jobs myself. Even though this is part-time, it's really not in the
Oh, no, it's
legislature.
full-time.
But
You're here,
um,
so it's
I,
full-time.
yeah, so I work 2 full-time jobs. So I understand, but I'm just really curious because I've been hearing people talk tonight, and I'm really trying to understand how much money, like they'll say it'll help me, it'll raise my family and pay rent. And I'm just trying to get a number on how much cash this will actually put back into someone's pocket.
Yeah, I understand that sentiment, but I also understand too, like any amount of money that's going to help fund like a family is definitely money that could be used
Yeah.
in just in general. So like it could be like $500, it could be $1,000. That's money that could be used for one thing so that we could focus on providing another service or another need. Because like me, for example, I know that I'm speaking from a teacher's perspective, so I know that my salary is higher than anyone that's in poverty. But anyone that's in poverty, they have decisions to make. It's like, okay, are we going to pay this bill or am I going to get groceries? And this bill would prevent sort of that choice from happening. So now they could get the food and they could pay the bill and they could also take care of their children. And so like any amount of money would help in that sense, I would say.
Sure.
Unfortunately, I don't have the figures because, you know, I'm just speaking from personal experience.
Great. Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Of course, thank
you
you for your questions. I appreciate it.
Representative, the answer to your question is that any parent who is a single filer under $100,000 or a joint filer of $200,000 will receive $600 per child up to 3 children.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Appreciate you being here tonight.
Thank you.
Circling back, we have Noemi Chalel.
Hola, señora Chilel, ¿estás presente? ¿Podrías activar tu micrófono?
Hola, muy buenas noches.
Hello, good evening.
Ay, permíteme un momento. Sorry.
Just one moment while I pull up my testimony.
okay.
Sorry.
Sorry. Lo siento. Sí, muy buenas noches, señor gobernador.
Very good evening, Mr. Chairman.
Yo vivo aquí en New Haven hace más de 12 años. Trabajo como niñera y mi esposo en construcción. Ambos pagamos nuestros impuestos por más de 9 años con el número TIN. Hoy tengo 5 hijos, de los cuales los 3 más pequeños son nacidos aquí. Yo vengo aquí a
Una
esta
pausa,
Sorry.
amiga. So I'm giving my testimony in favor of HB 6644. I'm a resident of New Haven. I have been for 12 years. I work as a nanny and my husband works in construction. We both pay our taxes for more than 12 years with an ITIN number. Adelante.
Okay. Hoy vengo aquí a esta audiencia pública porque necesito ser escuchada.
Today I'm here at this public hearing because I need to be heard.
Mi esposo, mis hijos y yo hemos pasado por muchas necesidades. Ya es un año de que el COVID llegó a Estados Unidos. Nuestras condiciones laborales son pésimas. No tenemos nada de estabilidad. Hemos pasado muchas necesidades en nuestros hogares y en la comunidad.
My husband, my 5 children, and I have experienced extreme scarcity. It's now worse 1 year since COVID arrived in the United States. Our working conditions are horrible. We don't have any stability. We have experienced extreme need in our homes and in our community.
Son muchos años que trabajamos en Estados Unidos. Hoy los sacamos adelante como trabajadores esenciales. Pagamos nuestros impuestos, casi nada nos devuelven. No es posible que hoy paguemos más impuestos que los ricos. Para colmo, el ITIN no nos devuelven nada.
We've worked many years in the United States. Today, we are holding up this country as essential workers and paying our taxes, which don't barely get returned to us. How is it possible that today we pay a greater portion of our income in taxes than the rich? On top of that, because we pay our taxes with an ITIN number, we get no refunds or tax credits.
Les pido que sean conscientes de nuestras realidades y de lo que viven nuestros hijos. ¿Algunos de ustedes tienen hijos? Supongo que sí. ¿Su hijo tiene un cuarto? Supongo que sí. ¿Qué tan grande es la cama de sus hijos? Pues como trabajadores del hogar veo que muchos niños usan camas matrimoniales, mientras 3 de mis hijos comparten una cama en un cuarto pequeño. Tanto sus hijos y los míos son niños nacidos en esta tierra y todos deberían tener las mismas oportunidades.
I appeal to you to think about our reality and the reality that our children live in. Do any of you have children? I imagine that you do. Do your children have a bedroom? I imagine that you do. And how big is the bed that your child sleeps in? Well, I work as a nanny and I see that some children have very big beds. While my children, 3 of my children share one bed in a small room. Your children and my children were born in this land, and I think that they should have the same opportunities.
¿Acaso existe diferencia entre ustedes y nosotros? ¿Por qué nuestros hijos no pueden tener mejores condiciones para que en el futuro ellos puedan tener las mismas oportunidades que sus hijos?
Is there a difference between you and us? Why can't our children have better conditions so that in the future they can have the same opportunities that your children have?
Por eso es necesario que esta reforma impositiva se apruebe para que podamos dar mejores condiciones a los niños.
This is why I urge you to pass tax reform so that we can give better conditions to the children.
Para empoderar la situación, resulta que nosotros los pobres terminamos pagando más impuestos que mucha gente rica. 7 veces más impuestos. Eso me parece injusto.
And to make the situation worse, we, the poor people, end up paying a lot more in taxes than many rich people. In some cases, 7 times more. This seems unfair to me.
Esta desigualdad es empeorada por la pandemia. No tenemos seguro, morimos más que los ricos. Nosotros no dejamos de trabajar en las calles, limpiamos los hospitales, nos exponemos más y pagamos más impuestos. Creo que es hora de que aprueben este tipo de iniciativa para podamos tener la posibilidad de gastar más en nuestros hijos y darles más oportunidades a ellos que se lo merecen y ellos son los futuros de mañana. Gracias. Buenas.
This inequality has gotten worse during the pandemic. We do not have health insurance. We are dying more than the rich in the pandemic. We cannot work from home. We do not have the luxury to stay home. We clean the hospitals and expose ourselves to the virus. And we pay more taxes than the rich. I think it's time to approve this kind of initiative so that we can have better possibilities. Our children deserve it, and our children are the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noemi. And what you said is exactly what this bill is all about, is to make sure that we lift people out of poverty and we give those children a chance to have the same ability to live their lives, regardless of what zip code they live in Connecticut. And if we can do that by helping give parents $600, $1,200, $1,800 off of their taxes, I think we can go a long way to try to make them get a little more resources than they had the year before. So thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate that.
Muchas gracias, señora Chilel, por dar su testimonio. Eso es exactamente lo que queremos lograr con este proyecto de ley. Queremos sacar a los niños de la pobreza, queremos que todos los niños tengan las mismas oportunidades sin importar cuál es su código postal. Y si una familia podría tener 600 o 1,800 o $2,000 más en el bolsillo, esto ayudaría para mejorar el futuro de todos los niños. Muchísimas gracias por su testimonio.
Gracias a ustedes y esperamos su respuesta y que de verdad es lo que hoy se está diciendo, sea escuchada y sea respondida.
Thank you very much, and we hope that everything that was said today will be heard and we'll see actions and results. Thank you so much for listening.
Representative Mastro Francesco has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much for your testimony. I was just curious on a couple of things. There was 3 stimulus checks sent out through the government. I was wondering, were you able to receive a stimulus check through you, Mr. Chairman?
Una pregunta de parte de la representante Mastro Francesco para usted, señora Chilel. El gobierno federal envió 3 cheques de estímulo. ¿Usted pudo recibir algún cheque de estímulo?
No, nosotros no recibimos ni uno de los cheques que se han aprobado, entonces ni tampoco tenemos seguro médico, entonces no tenemos esa protección prácticamente de gobierno federal y estatal. No recibimos ni una ayuda.
No, Representative. We did not receive any stimulus checks. We were excluded from the stimulus checks because of our immigrant status, and we are also excluded from public health insurance and from any government services,
Thank
federal
you.
and state.
Thank you for
Gracias.
answering. Thank you.
Muchas
Thank you very
gracias
much
por
for,
contestar.
sorry. Thank you very much for answering that question. And I'm just curious, she had mentioned that they pay more in taxes than people that are wealthier. And if she wouldn't mind answering this question similar to what Representative Zupkis had asked the previous person testifying, would she be able to tell me how much she did pay in taxes? I know that might be a personal question, but I was just curious. Through you, Mr. Chairman.
Sí, muchas gracias por contestar la pregunta y tengo una pregunta más para usted, señora Chilel. Como usted ha mencionado que mucha gente pobre paga más impuestos que la gente rica, ¿usted podría decirnos más o menos cuánto pagó usted en impuestos este año? Yo entiendo que es una pregunta delicada. ¿Está ahí, señora Chilel?
Sí, estoy aquí.
Pues la representante pregunta si usted quiere compartir cuánto pagó en impuestos, pero ella entiende que es una pregunta delicada.
Sí, no sé cómo contestarle esto.
I don't feel comfortable answering.
Okay, no, thank you. I respect that. I just wanted to get some clarification. Well, thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate it. I have no more questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Está bien, yo respeto su privacidad. No tengo más preguntas. Muchas gracias.
No, está bien. Gracias a ustedes también por escucharnos y como le digo, es algo que verdad no lo van a entender, ¿verdad? El precio que nosotros pagamos, ¿verdad? Pagamos con nuestra salud también porque somos expuestos ahora más con el COVID, son más expuestos al trabajo. Entonces, estamos arriesgando nuestras vidas con el fin de regresar a casa sanos y salvos, poder ver a nuestros hijos también, porque el día que nos llega, ¿verdad? La muerte, ¿quién por nuestros hijos? Entonces, es lo que tememos nosotros.
I just want to thank you for your question. I think it's hard for you to understand everything that we're paying because we're paying with our health and we're paying with our lives. And we're afraid that when we go out to work, we might not come home and our children might be left without a parent. So there's a lot of costs that we're paying. But I want to thank you for listening to us.
Thank you.
Senator Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, this is, I believe, a question more for you. How would this bill help an individual such as, and I don't recall her name, the one who just testified, Noella, but also, you know, we've heard very similar testimonies from a handful, maybe a half a dozen or so people. You know, you could almost, it's almost like a boilerplate testimony here. So if they're non-documented, if you said that this is why we are providing this bill for them, how would they be receiving these credits? If they're not getting them on a federal level, if they're paying into the system, which I understand, and they're not getting, you know, a tax, you know, some type of form of their contribution back on a federal level, how are they receiving it here on the state, or would they through this bill?
The bill, Senator, defines eligibility based on taxpayers under the current definition of what the statutes say about what a taxpayer is. It does not specifically say in this bill whether immigration status has anything to do with eligibility. It simply uses the state's definition of taxpayer. And in these cases, as you're hearing, they do pay taxes, and therefore the law would make them eligible for that, given the fact that they are a taxpayer and the state considers them taxpayers.
So through their taxes that they pay through their employer would qualify them for receiving these tax credits? If
they meet the definition of taxpayer under this bill through whatever taxes that they may or may not pay, any taxpayer would be eligible if they meet that qualification.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I could add really quickly, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, I'm Megan Fountain, Advocacy Coordinator with ULA. And the federal child tax credit is available to all taxpayers, no matter whether they pay their taxes with a Social Security number or a TIN number. But these people who pay taxes with TIN numbers were intentionally excluded from stimulus payments and excluded from many other things. But Connecticut can easily follow the example of the federal government and create this child tax credit and make sure that all taxpayers are eligible. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, and all of you for this long hearing.
Thank you, Megan, for what you're doing and for that answer. Tom, next up.
Yeah, yep. Next up, we have Lisa Tepper Bates, followed by Shannon O'Malley.
Thank you so much, Representative Scanlon, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to submit testimony in support of HB 6654, an act establishing the child tax credit. My name is Lisa Tepper Bates, and I serve as president and CEO of United Way of Connecticut. And I'm here before you today to represent my organization, as well as the 15 local United Ways across our state. As you've heard from so many today, Connecticut has about 40% of our households who struggle every day, paycheck to paycheck, to make ends meet. And that has only gotten worse, as I think you all appreciate, during this COVID-19 public health emergency. Despite working as hard as they can at the jobs available to them in our state, they are struggling to afford life's most basic necessities, such as food, housing, childcare, transportation. Connecticut United Ways, for this reason, support HB 6654. And again, as you've heard from other speakers today, child tax credits are one of the most effective tools to reduce child poverty. Connecticut is one of only 2 states that lack this type of vehicle to help our struggling families. And to the question asked by Representative Zupkus, which Representative Scanlon did address in part, a typical married family in Connecticut with 3 children pays about $3,187 in income taxes right now. Under HB 6654, that same family will pay $1,987 instead, which means that that family with 3 children would keep $1,800 of their hard-earned income, which they can use flexibly to meet the life costs that they prioritize. We heard from a previous speaker about education technology costs, and that's an important example. Because as you know, many types of benefits are very targeted and restricted. The CTC, in contrast, provides flexible income that each recipient family can use with dignity to meet the costs that they believe are most important for their family. And again, to address in part the question that Representative Zupkus asked, what does this amount to? $1,800 represents a full month of childcare for 2 small children. It represents 2 months of nutritious food for a family and just over a month of housing costs. $1,800 might be the sum it takes to keep a car at high mileage running if that car serves as the breadwinner's key means of getting to and from work. And as I think you probably know, transportation assistance
30
is a
seconds.
specific area in which there's very, very little in the way of assistance available in Connecticut. So in sum, $1,800 is a meaningful amount for that Connecticut family who is living on the razor's edge. As you're also aware, our families of color have been adversely impacted at a greater degree during COVID, and this would specifically help those families. And I'd like to just conclude by reflecting to you, as you probably also heard from others today, that for every CTC dollar a recipient earns, they return $1.38 to the economy, supporting not only their families, but also their local economies and communities. So thank you very much, and I'd be glad to take any questions.
Representative Zupkus.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Lisa, for coming today. I have a friend who runs the United Way in Waterbury, and I know the good work you do. So thank you for what you do at United Way. And I by no means was saying or demeaning the amount of money, because I'm grateful for every dollar, quite honestly, that I keep in my pocket versus giving to the state of Connecticut. So if, the more the better. But I do have one quick question. So do you know if these, for example, that the child that is born here and the parents may not, does the child get Husky and SNAP and those benefits? Do you know?
So, Representative, as a rule, children tend to be eligible for those types of benefits. As I'm sure you appreciate, we as a society pay more, not less, when we seek to deny them benefits. So indeed, most of the time, certainly for SNAP, and I'm fairly certain for Husky, they would be eligible here in Connecticut.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for United Way.
And Chair, if it so please you, I'd like to just also add an additional piece of information. Important to know that those who are in undocumented status actually contribute about $7 billion a year to Social Security because they do pay those taxes through the ITIN or the Immigrant Taxation Identification Number. So important just to recognize that to some of the questions that others have asked here.
Thank you very much. Senator Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for testifying, Ms. Bates. I also too have a friend that is the coordinator here at the United Way, and she does a great job, and all of you do a wonderful job. You may not have the answer to this, and if it's okay if you don't, if you can get us the information, that would be great. You're the second person, I think, that made reference to the number of children that we would be able to raise out of poverty if this bill passes. Would you have that number available and with you tonight? And if not, if you don't mind getting that to us, that would be good for us to know.
That's great. I don't have that for you, Senator. I would just flag the fact that I do hope that we in Connecticut in fact, have a little bit higher bar than just raising people up past the federal poverty line. We know that a household budget, survival budget for a family of 4 in Connecticut, a very expensive state, is actually about $90,000 a year. That's the ALICE, or Asset Limited Income Constrained and Employed Household Survival Budget, and I'd be glad to provide that for you. So lifting them out of poverty according to the federal poverty line is a certain type of goal, and it's good to have any progress and any motion upward. But I would just flag the fact that we in Connecticut, I hope we set the bar at a higher level. I hope our goal is to actually raise our families to a level of self-sufficiency where they can truly afford the cost of living here in Connecticut.
I totally agree, and I understand there are many variables of lifting families out of poverty altogether. I guess what, when I hear the testimony, though, it's sort of specific, like there's a number at your hands when you make a statement that, if you pass this bill, we will be raising X amount of children out of poverty. And I was just curious to know what that number was.
So, Senator, I can tell you that there are 832,500 children that would be impacted by this or benefit from this bill, because that is the number of children that would be eligible under the federal expansion, and this would be eligible to that. So that is almost 1 million kids in our state. 13.1% of all children in Connecticut currently live in poverty, according to the census. So you can do a little rough math there to figure out how many of the 832 would be there. Obviously, that disproportionately falls among children of color, whereas 30% of Black and brown children, compared to, I think it's less than 10% of their white counterparts, are living in poverty. So some quick math would give you that number. But I would also say that the provision of this bill at the federal level that just was expanded is projected to cut child poverty in this country by 50%, which is obviously really, really significant. So to Ms. Tara Bates's point, whether it's one child or 1,000 kids or 100 kids, these are all kids that we all want to be out of poverty, and giving each of their parents a couple $100 more to meet the needs that they have, for me, is a very worthwhile goal. And I've heard some of my colleagues tonight talking about the fact that they want, people to make decisions instead of government. That is exactly what this is about. It's keeping more money in their pocket in the form of tax relief. And it's not a government program. It's not a handout. It's literally just allowing them to keep their own money. And that's an idea that hopefully is perhaps usually more of a conservative one that we can all agree to here, based on a very laudable goal, which is to help our parents, regardless of whether they're undocumented or a middle-class family who's 7th-generation Connecticutians here in Norwich or New London or wherever you want to be.
I'm glad you're starting to come around to our side of the aisle here regarding keeping more money in our pocket, Mr. Chair. But I think if I hear you correctly, we have 1 million or so children in the state. 13.5% of those are in poverty or poverty level. That's 130,500. And if you take it based on, thought I heard you say 50% of the federal, federal, and I'm not quite sure exactly what the program is, but we will be able to move 50% of the children out of poverty. So we're talking about 70,000, 65,000 kids out of poverty level if we change or we adopt this bill. Is that correct?
So I don't have specific figures for Connecticut of what a Connecticut tax cut would mean. What I was saying, Senator, was that right now the federal tax credit since 1997 in the United States has been escalated from about $400 in 97. It's now at $2,000. In the bill that the president just signed, that Congress just passed, it goes from $2,000 to $3,000 for children between the ages of 6 and 17, and from $2,000 to $3,600 for kids under 6, which is awesome. The problem is that expires next year. But that provision, the $1,000 and the $1,600 plus up, is projected to cut poverty in half. why it's so important to me that we do this year is because if we are successful to cut child poverty in half, we don't want any Connecticut child to slide back into poverty when that $1,000 or $1,600 goes away. And we can help try to ensure that by making sure that a state version would sort of pick up some of the slack that the feds are going to cover for a year. And that's what this proposal is really all about today. I think we can definitely get some modeling done about how many specific children in Connecticut will be lifted out of poverty. But the basic math that we're sort of just gaming out here on the back of an envelope is really that I know the following things are true. There's 832,000 children that are going to be impacted by this. There's about 450,000 filers. That's not people. It's usually probably about 1 million people, because a lot of people file jointly, as you know, for their taxes. And that 13.1% of kids are currently in poverty in America. But the hard number I don't have for you, Senator.
Okay, maybe we'll be able to get that, Mr. Chair. You know, maybe OFA will be able to provide that information for us. But thank you for providing me the information, and thank you, Ms. Bates, for testifying here today.
Representative Meskers.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Apologies. I have to learn to start with thank you, Mr. Chair. I seem to launch right in, so I apologize. So Lisa, in your conversation there, you mentioned $1.38 in terms of the impact. I think that's an important thing that we would ask for OFA as well. In terms of the dynamic scoring, the tax credit will end up returning cash to the parents, given where they are in the economic stream. This is not normally going into a savings account. It's normally to pay either deferred bills or food or clothing or educational supplies. So there'll be an automatic stimulus and a capture of sales tax on the purchases. So there'll be some general feedback loop in the economy. So I guess I'd like to have a better understanding when I ask you tonight, but through OFA, when we talk about the stimulative effect. And to our chairman's comment, I think when we look at the 50% from the feds going against the Fed level, it'll be interesting to get the data from OFA about what the Fed motion does about Connecticut poverty and ALICE levels, and whether ours helps move them even further up that chain away or closer to the ALICE level. So that's very important. So thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. And Representative, just to answer your question, the $1.38 actually comes from Moody's modeling. We'd be glad to provide that for you or to OFA. And you're exactly right that it is fairly well documented that when you put money in the pockets of families at this level, it will return to the economy, frankly, within days, if not, if maybe weeks, but very, very quickly. And that is very well documented. So thank you for pointing that out.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Representative Farrar.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Ms. Bates, for being here. And I jumped in from another meeting, and so apologies if this was noted already. But I jumped in the part of the conversation where Chairman Scanlon was sharing a little bit of the information that how many kids we do know would be affected, and then how many children are in poverty. But I know that the United Way and your wonderful research, shows us much more clearly families that aren't able to make ends meet. So do we have a sense of, when we think more from that realistic standard, how many kids we could really impact with this type of policy?
Well, I think Representative Scanlon laid out the numbers, frankly, better than I could do, and my hat is off to him. So thank you for doing that, Representative Scanlon. But I think I would also like to point out that when we talk about those families, this is an issue of equity. 57% of Black households in Connecticut, 63% of Hispanic households, and 73% of single female-headed households in Connecticut with children live below the ALICE threshold. So I would add that detail to the numbers that were shared by Representative Scanlon. This is a very powerful tool that would have an incredible impact on the vast majority of all ALICE families with children. So 40% of our population is ALICE. great many of those are families with children, and it would have a positive impact on all of them at a substantial level.
Thank you for that. And I hope as we look at, as was noted by some of my colleagues, the analysis that goes into this file copy that'll come out, that we highlight some of this information beyond just the federal poverty level, since we know that really does not tell the true story of what it takes for families to make ends meet. And it really doesn't tell the whole story as we come out of this crisis. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Devlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have one question. Honestly, I'm not sure if it's for you or if it's for Ms. Tepper Bates. We were just throwing a lot of numbers around, and I heard testimony earlier from one of our colleagues. We were talking about 90,000 kids, and then I heard 83,200, and then I just heard 132,000. What is it that we're talking about? Which number is the right number? Or do we not know?
Well, I think there's a bunch of different numbers that are being thrown around, and I'll let Ms. Tepper Bates talk about the ones that she just mentioned. But what I was just sharing with Senator Martin was that the overall number of children who will benefit from this tax policy in Connecticut is 832,500. That is the overall number of children who, if this passes, would be eligible, because that is who is eligible right now for the federal credit in Connecticut. The numbers that Ms. Tepper Bates were talking about were specific numbers about specific things that she, in her capacity, deals with through the United Way, and I'll let her speak to those. But the number I shared was 832,500, because that's the number eligible right now under the federal tax credit.
Thank you. Was there anything
Thank
else
you.
you wanted to add, Ms. Tepper Bates?
I would add, I think, Representative, when I referred to $90,000, that is the ALICE, or Asset Limited Income Constrained and Employed Household Survival Budget in Connecticut, specific to the cost of living here, for a two-parent family with two small children. So perhaps that's the 90,000 in your mind.
No, I think it was referenced by a colleague earlier today in her testimony, but I'm now imagining, based on the clarity from the chairman, that it was probably around that number. So yeah, no, I appreciate it. And you know what, Mr. Chairman, I really do want to applaud you, because I think there has been some really good dialogue around this proposed bill that we don't always even get to have a chance in committee. And I realize this is a public hearing, not a committee discussion. But it does beg a lot of questions that sometimes we don't have the opportunity to get to in committee, right? Who would not want to lift children out of poverty? And I was just in a call where I was jumping back and forth with actually the Kennedy Center, where we were listening to parents of IDD kids. And one of our colleagues in the Senate was telling them, their parents, to lobby their legislators, because the state needs to give more money to pay for the care for the individuals who care for their children, not addressing some of the systemic issues that we have in our state. And in the same proposal, the same bill that the governor has offered, we're freezing tax deductions for seniors. Right? We're doing all sorts of different things. And at the net, I'd really like to understand, and I think it was Ms. Tepper Bates who also acknowledged, the cost of living in Connecticut continues to increase. And all the good things we do, and then the new state programs we put into place, right, to try to offer more good things, all costs money. And the one-off programs always sound so wonderful, which is why I really appreciate this dialogue. But we do need to look at them, I think, in a broad context also. And these discussions help sort of flavor those specific aspects of the things that we need to think about. But it is complex, and I just wanted to applaud you for some of the broader dialogue that we've been able to have and that you had with Senator Martin. So thank you.
You're welcome. And I'm getting a second wind here at 8:45 because I'm enjoying this conversation myself. And I think it's a really important one to have. I know it was dormant for most of the day, but I'm really glad we're having it tonight. And I think you're right, Representative, especially in COVID times where we're not in the building together you and I can't just go grab a cup of coffee and talk about this in the CAF, and we're not just sort of talking about this in the hall. So I really enjoyed this opportunity, and obviously to the extent as chair and working with the ranking members that I can facilitate other conversations like this, I'm all for that because I think it's really, really important. So
Thank you.
Representative Metro-Francesco, if you don't mind, I'm going to go to Representative Cheeseman next in deference to her as the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank you. I've missed some of this conversation. Had to deal with a family mini crisis, but it's resolved. So, and I want to thank you for coming here today, Lisa. I have a couple of questions and then a general comment, sort of following on from what Representative Scanlon and Representative Devlin said. So we're talking about earned income. For families who are at this level, what other programs are available to them because of their income that would assist them, in terms of rental assistance, SNAP benefits, all those you care for? So can you please run down perhaps the menu of programs that do exist to help families in this situation?
Well, Representative Cheeseman, that's challenging to do because it really depends on income levels. And as you're also, I think, aware, a number of benefits stop at different income levels, benefits cliffs, we call them.
Which is
so
one of
really
the things
depends.
I believe, there was a bill looking at that because that's such an issue. Why should someone who's trying to actually improve their situation be punished by losing the benefits that are going to make their life sustainable? So
that's right. So it really is a multi-sided equation, and you'd have to look very specifically at each family. What I would suggest, though, to you is that national research shows that even at a maximum allocation of SNAP, or what we used to call food stamps, the typical family can only afford about 75% of a nutritious food basket for their family. So, that benefit exists, it's simply inadequate. With regard to rental assistance in Connecticut, programs exist, and we're glad they exist. And yet, the vast majority of renters in this state, I'm sorry, not the majority, 50%, fully 50%, pay more than is affordable for their rent. And there is no assistance available for them because rental assistance is what it is. There is a certain amount of it. You're lucky if you are able to secure it. So I'd suggest it's not just a question of what programs exist, but it is a question of how many people are struggling and how many can tap into those programs and what do those programs do for them. And even if you are able to access those, there is still a gap because Connecticut is a very expensive state. And that's why the child tax credit is so very important for families with children in Connecticut, even if they are lucky enough to have some of those other benefits, because we know they're still struggling. The research bears that out.
Okay, thank you. And as I say, just following on from the conversation before, when I consider everything we've discussed today, particularly in terms of the skilled trades, whether we're technical schools, the advanced manufacturing pipeline, the surest way to lift people out of poverty is to provide those excellent job opportunities with the commensurate training, with the commensurate education. So I think this is, everything is tying together. Yes, you want to make sure families are not suffering in the short term, but the long term, the solution is to make sure that children growing up in this state, people who, because of whatever circumstances, want to be in a different career or job, that we provide the resources and the financing to allow that to happen, because that's what creates a successful, vibrant Connecticut in which everyone can live and thrive. So that's my little lecture for the day, a sermon. Anyway, thank you so much for coming, Lisa, and thank you for all you do. Thank you, Chair Scanlon.
Thank you. Representative Metro-Francesco.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Lisa, for your testimony. Just a quick question and just for clarification. I believe Representative Zupkis had asked a gentleman previous in terms of dollar amount, what he thought he would get back on his tax return. And I just want to clarify for people that this is a $600 tax credit that you can claim. And is that correct? Through you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman?
Well, it's a $600 tax credit, but it is also refundable, which is a very important point to point out here. It's a 70% refundable tax credit, which means that if you don't make enough money to actually pay federal tax, you can actually get the actual revenue from this. It doesn't have to be a tax credit.
Thank you. And through you. So if it is you get a 70% return on that $600, depending on your income. But if somebody get that $100,000 income, what would the actual dollar amount be for that?
Depends on how many
Based on
children
that
they
600?
It depends on how many children they have. So it's
One.
$600 per child up to 3 children. So if you were living in Woolkit and you had 3 children and you were making $90,000 a year, you would get $1,800 off of your taxes on your state tax liability the next year.
Correct. So you would get not an $1,800 refund, right? Did you just say you get 70% of that? So am I misinterpreting it?
So if you were a sort of, let's say, a single mother living in Woolkit and you had 3 children, but you didn't make enough money in that year to pay any federal tax, you would get 70% of that $1,800 as a refundable credit.
Correct. Okay. So that understand. So, but if I was in your scenario, you had mentioned $100,000. I'm a single mom. I make $100,000. I have 1 child, $600 tax credit I can take. What would be my refund amount on that?
It would be whatever your tax liability was for that year minus $600.
So it's possible I would get nothing. Would that be correct?
I might not be understanding your question, but if you make, let me try to explain it like this. If you make enough money to actually have to pay taxes, then you will get a $600 credit off of your taxes per child that you have. So let's just say that your tax liability for that year, your tax bill, you go to your accountant and he says you owe $4,000 to the state. Under this bill, you would only owe $34,000 to the state, $3,400 to the state.
Correct. And I clearly understand that. I just think the impression is for people testifying that they are going to get more of like a refund. And for people that are just unsure of the process and the tax policies. And I just wanted to really clarify that for them, that it's not necessarily a $600 refund you're going to get per child.
Yes. And without making any sort of prejudgment about any of the individuals who are on here, because I don't know what their tax situation is, but there are some individuals who we've heard from who have testified that there was a woman this morning, I mentioned it to my wife when I got home because it stuck with me. She had, I believe, I forget what her name was, but she had a young son, Santiago, that came on. And her husband is a worker who works in the fields, but she has had to stay home because they have no childcare, and she does not pay any taxes. And so in that person's situation, and when she was testifying about what the money would mean, I believe that she was well informed to know that she would get the $420 on that as opposed to the $600 because she does not work and therefore she's not paying any income tax.
Right. Well, thank you for that clarification. I clearly understand it. I just wanted to make sure people watching understand it, because it could be a little bit confusing, them thinking that they're going to get a refund, kind of like the stimulus checks, right? $1,200. I just want them to be clear on what they are getting. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have no further questions.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thank you, Lisa, for being here tonight.
Thank you.
All right, next up we have Shannon O'Malley.
Hi, good evening, esteemed members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. As we go into our 11th hour of testimony tonight, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I'll be testifying in support of HB 6654, an act establishing a child tax credit against the personal income tax. So my name is Dr. Shannon O'Malley, and I'm a pediatrician who works in New Haven and New London. And as a child and public health advocate and as a resident of Connecticut, I am testifying tonight in support again of HB 6654. Adding a state level child tax credit, like almost all other states, is an important anti-poverty step that can have a powerful effect on all eligible Connecticut families, but especially the children who are living in poverty that we've spent so much talking about tonight. And I just want to say, in response to Senator Martin's question, though Representative Scanlon answered it excellently, Connecticut Voices for Children in their written testimony did provide a source that was a joint study by the Institute on Taxation for Economic Policy and Columbia University that did a study analysis of all 50 states if they had employed the child tax credit fully. And so they had estimated a little bit higher refund, up to $2,000. And as Representative Scanlon has so perfectly said, ours can be up to $1,800, but they estimated that 12% of children living in Connecticut would be brought out of poverty by that, or that's about 12,000 going off of the 2019 Census Bureau data. So I support this bill because I see poverty's effect every day on my patients' health. This is not just my experience as one pediatrician. An overwhelming body of research has shown that poverty is a clear risk factor for suboptimal child health across almost every spectrum. For example, children who live in poverty have worse developmental outcomes, higher rates of asthma attacks, increased risk of injury, and increased rates of obesity, just to name a few. These poor health outcomes follow them throughout childhood and into adulthood, putting them at greater risk for heart disease and countless other long-term illnesses. This leads to overall increased downstream costs to our society in terms of healthcare costs and lost economic opportunity. And these are human and economic tolls that can be prevented with early intervention and public health investments like the CTC. We know that poverty negatively influences child health, and thankfully, we also know that there are measures we can take to change the trajectory of these children's lives. I support this bill because it provides one of these evidence-based measures for children and families. Previous studies have shown that anti-poverty measures like the CTC and the Earned Income Tax Credit that we've also talked about tonight have meaningful improvements on child poverty and consequently on child health. Because of this, large health organizations like the American Academy of Pediatrics and National Academy of Medicine have specifically called for the expansion of tax credits as a means to decrease child poverty and improve child health. And as my colleague, Dr. Molly Markowitz, just recently testified tonight, we as pediatricians so believe in this specific measure that our clinic has opened a free tax prep site, and some of our physician colleagues have even become volunteer tax assistants to help families get these credits. Therefore, I'm asking you that you please support HB 6654, which has the potential to benefit not only thousands of Connecticut children and their families by helping to lift the burden of poverty, but also to ultimately benefit the economic future of our great state. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me and to all of us tonight.
Thank you, Dr. O'Malley. Appreciate your testimony. I don't see any questions though, but thank you.
Yep. Next up, Dana Reed, followed by Eric Hammerling.
Good evening. Senator Fonfero, Representative Scanlon, Martin, Cheeseman, and esteemed members of the Finance and Revenue and Bonding Committee. My name is Dana Reed, and I'm a former resident of New Haven, Connecticut. In 2008, my husband and I relocated our family to Columbus, Ohio. We all know that Connecticut is expensive. It's an expensive state to live in terms of housing, healthcare, food, transportation. When we lived in Connecticut, we were a young family with 3 children working hard to ensure that they were in the right schools and that they were having the right experiences. However, my husband and I found that opportunities for us to move forward economically were slim. I was pursuing my bachelor's degree and trying to advance my career, while my husband was pursuing certification to begin his career in HVAC. Even though we were both working very hard, our progress was slow. We made the decision to relocate to Columbus, Ohio because housing was significantly cheaper, and there seemed to be a lot of opportunities out there for us to grow our careers without going broke in the process. So we've been quite successful in Ohio. Since we left Connecticut, we've been able to purchase a home, contribute to savings, and both my husband and I are well into our careers. Our children are thriving. Our son is a trained chef who offers private luxury chef services. And our youngest daughter, our daughter, is graduating from The Ohio State University in May. While our life in Ohio is abundant, I do regret that we had to leave our home and our family in Connecticut in order to thrive. My mother, my aunts, my cousins, my oldest child, and my grandchildren, they're in Connecticut. It was my first home and my roots are deep there. My grandmother was born in Connecticut. The child tax credit, along with other initiatives like it, could have eased the cost of living when we were a young family working hard to raise our children in that state. There's always talk of millionaire tax flight, but do we ever talk about working people that flee the state? This is why I'm testifying in support
30
of
seconds,
HB
30 seconds.
6654 to implement a child tax credit in Connecticut. Making Connecticut affordable for families is critical to ensuring that families do not need to leave the state to find financial relief. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good evening.
Thank you so much for your testimony, Ms. Reed. And Leslie, Representative Zepkis has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's really just a comment. I want to say thank you for coming and sharing your testimony. You sound exactly like people that I talk to all the time on how they're leaving Connecticut because it is so expensive to be here. And I've heard a couple of comments tonight on if this passes, half of the children will be out of poverty, and that's a good thing if that is the case. So I really appreciate you sharing, and congratulations to your children and what you've done with your family and your children, because I believe that Connecticut is extremely expensive and burdensome with all the taxes that we have here. So I hope that this bill could take half of the children out of poverty. And I hope that we also continue at looking other ways to stop taxing and possibly even lower taxes and get rid of some taxes. So, excuse me, thank you for sharing. And really, I wanted to say congratulations to you and your family for not moving out of Connecticut, but working hard and making a great family.
Representative Wood.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would also like to thank, and I'm sorry, I can't see her name up here on the screen, the woman who's just finished testifying.
Ms. Reed.
Ms. Reed, thank you. As a fellow Bucko, I have to comment because I'm very proud of my Ohio roots, and the cost of living in Ohio is so much less. Mrs. Reed, a question though to you, knowing the cost of living and the differential between Ohio and Connecticut, would the earned income tax credit, if we pass this, have made that much of a difference compared to the cost of living in Ohio?
Representative Wood, it's Tom. I believe she just left.
Oh, shoot. I
On her own, on her own.
A Buckeye.
I think she just thought she was done.
Oh, shoot. Okay. That's why I couldn't see her up top. Well, I guess I'll have to visit her in Columbus. All right. Thank you.
All right. So moving on, we have Eric Hammerling.
Good evening, honorable members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is Eric Hammerling, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Forest and Park Association. You have seen lots of testimony on the bonding requests in SB 887 for the Deep Recreational Trails and Greenways Program, Open Space Grant Programs, State Park Infrastructure, and Climate Resiliency. And we strongly support bonding for all these programs. I want to focus my remarks on why these programs are so critical for your support. During this pandemic year, people have been getting outdoors in record numbers. DEEP has estimated an increase of 50% in trail use on public lands. The Yukon Connecticut Trail Census has measured an increase of 38% across trails that they monitor, and visitation to state parks, forests, and wildlife management areas has probably increased by 20% or more. Outdoor recreation businesses like REI and others have seen how this connection to the outdoors has positively impacted their bottom lines. You'll recall that at times over the past year, bicycles, canoes, kayaks, and other outdoor related gear were completely sold out. And we expect that the investments in outdoor equipment made by many individuals and families will continue to be used at high levels long into the future. There's great demand for recreational trails and access to the outdoors, and it will take investments like those in SB 887 to ensure that trails stay open, well-maintained, and safe for the public. Adding some urgency to this request, recreational trails and greenways, as well as park infrastructure, face the growing challenge of a changing climate, which is generating more intense storms that cause significant damage that needs to be repaired every year. This need to repair and reopen exists, whether you're at the southern gateway to the New England National Scenic Trail in Guilford, at Remington Woods in Bridgeport, on a Blue Blaze hiking trail, or in many special places around the state. Last August, Tropical Storm Isaias caused considerable damage to recreational lands and structures that in some places took months to remedy, and it could have been worse. The impacts of a changing climate can be most devastating in shoreline parks, which happen to be the parks most heavily visited by the public. These special places face the growing dual threat from supercharged storms alongside sea level rise. Investments to make state
30 seconds, sir, 30 seconds.
As well as recreational trails and open spaces more accessible and resilient are both critical to make and we hope worthy of your strong support. I'd be glad to respond if you have any questions.
Senator Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Eric, for your testimony. Always good to see you. We heard a little bit earlier from Amy Blaymore Patterson about the line items specifically for OSWA being increased to 5 million. And while we understand that's a good thing, having more money in budgeted for land acquisition grants, she mentioned 10 million being optimal and the deep ask. And I just wondered if you could weigh in on that a little bit.
Sure, and I'm very pleased to work alongside Amy. We're both co-chairs of the Open Space Review Committee for DEEP and are in a lot of the discussions having to do with the OSWA program grants. This year, there were $25 million worth of applications for open space grants and only about $7.5 million to meet that need. So if what is in the governor's budget is not increased by $5 million from what is in the governor's budget at $5 million, so doubling that to $10 million in each year of the biennium, will continue to be behind in terms of being able to fund great proposals to protect special places all around the state. We saw some wonderful proposals that weren't able to be fully funded or even partially funded. There was an imposed cap of $400,000, which sounds like a lot of money, but if you're talking about something that would normally receive twice that amount, that just means that the land trusts, municipalities, water companies that are trying to protect land have a lot more private money that they have to try to raise. That slows down the whole process, and we'd love to see in the governor's budget funding that will help to prime the pump and ensure that great proposals can be funded.
Thanks for that. And it seems that even at 10, if we were to add 10 million with a $25 million ask and grants still wouldn't make the program whole. Was the 25 million ask this year in the applications, is that a high year? I mean, I could certainly pull some history, but I suspect that you probably know, you know, in years past what that numbers look like.
Yeah, this happened to be a record high year in terms of number of applications and request amounts, but you know, there were 37 applications, you know, totaling that 25 million in requests. But in a normal year, it would be just slightly lower in terms of requests, maybe about 20 million. You know, again, if you doubled the amount of funding to the OSWA program, it wouldn't meet the full need, but it certainly would meet a whole lot more of the need. And we think that's important to make that investment. Amy also mentioned you know, some of the recommendations that came out of the Governor's Council on Climate Change. If we want to invest to make sure that we are more resilient as a state and protect more forest land and farmland and you know, and land to get closer to the 21% open space goal that we have as a state, we need to make those investments. So you know, what we are supporting is not beyond what DEEP has themselves asked for. They just didn't get what they asked for in the governor's budget.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much for your testimony. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Representative Devlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think at this point, less of a question, more of a comment. Eric, you're kind of bringing up the rear of the environmental all-stars who have been testifying today before this committee. And I really want to thank you for your work, and particularly as you were just speaking related to open space, right? Because once it's gone, and it's really not coming back. Growing up in the Chicago area, we had forest preserves, and you would literally go to a place at a little park and you'd experience a forest. Partly maybe it was because it was the Plainlands, I don't know. But when I first came to Connecticut, I remember saying, oh my God, you can just like get out of your car and go. You can just go into the woods. So I really value and appreciate the work that you are doing, and just wanted to thank you for that. You're an incredible advocate, and just want to say thanks.
Oh, thank you so much, Representative Devlin. I've got to say, this last year, there were a lot of people who moved to Connecticut, and I'm hearing from people all the time how they're so glad that they moved here because it is so beautiful. And there are so many places they can access a short distance away from where they live. Every community has open spaces that they are proud of, and it's a wonderful way to engage the public. And it's also a way to lure businesses here and people who want to be in a place that cares about the outdoors. So thanks very much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you're right. And I was just out walking my dogs yesterday and ran into somebody and was telling them about the trails at Aspetuck and how phenomenal they are and what a great resource. So yeah, you're right. And people have been out walking, taking advantage. So anyway, thank you for you and your colleagues of everything you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming tonight, Eric. And you mentioned absent state funding, the need to raise more from private foundations. And in my part of the state, I'm East Lyme, Salem. We've had, great success in working with people like the New England Forestry Foundation to preserve some open space. We're currently, working on the Oswegatchie Hills Preserve. So given that the state doesn't have unlimited funds, I'd just like you to discuss the role that private fundraising, coupled with works of municipalities, work of the state, can play in preserving these open spaces that we've all agreed are so important. And as we look at, a net carbon zero future, the treated areas, all of those, if you actually do an audit of the state, are incredibly important in achieving those goals. So the long way of saying, hey, how can we best leverage state money and private money to achieve our goals?
It's a great question, and it's something that is obviously a part of the process because OSWA is a matching grant program. There are a lot of matching grant programs, and I think that's a good thing because it ensures that there is both a local interest. There are many private interests that value open spaces, but I think the state needs to be a leader alongside private investments to make sure that we're kind of embracing those special places from all angles. We're fortunate to have the Community Investment Act. We're fortunate to have a lot of foundations who are interested in the outdoors. But the funding is very hard because there are so many different things that I think we're all trying to do simultaneously. So I guess we're hoping that the funding that is available for open space stays at a good level or even more, so that we can leverage even more private funding to ensure that special places are protected. So it takes all of us contributing to make sure that it's done well. It's a challenge. I know you're familiar with land trusts in your district who are doing great work and really engaging people with the outdoors, which is good for public health, which is good for local economies. There are so many ways that these investments make sense. So I hope the investment level across the board will continue to be high.
Thank you. And as you say, from the public health point of view, and you mentioned the huge explosion in interest in outdoor activities because it was something one could do safely with one's family. And in fact, I just was on a Board of Selectmen meeting tonight discussing the use of some of those federal dollars that towns and cities are going to see. And I think, if you look at preservation of open space, making areas available for people to enjoy the outdoors, whether it's building sidewalks or helping to preserve natural areas, I think that's certainly something we should be exploring, because what better way to enjoy our beautiful state than to get out there with our families? So thank you. I'm obviously, in support of what you're doing, and I hope we can continue to leverage those private dollars, provided we put enough in, have enough skin in the game from the state. So thank you so much for being here tonight, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks so much for your support.
Senator Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Eric, just any of those proposals have to deal with any solar farms by chance? And I guess I'll just to get your thoughts on solar farms in general, and should they be part of, should they be allowed in parks, Connecticut parks and forests, of our farms that may be qualified for open space?
It's a great question, and one that obviously is at the front of a lot of people's minds right now. And certainly the Environment Committee and Energy and Technology have been debating this. I guess our position has pretty consistently been that we need more solar as a state, but we'd rather not see it at the expense of farmland and forest land. And there are many hardened places, brownfields, rooftops, parking lots that I'd like to see solar first before seeing it on some of those other protected lands. That said, there is a growing body of knowledge around agricultural lands and opportunities for dual use, which can be done in ways that can both support what farmers might be interested in terms of generating solar power locally, and allow for agricultural activities to continue. But it's a very delicate subject. I'm probably already in over my head, and I do appreciate, though, you're raising it. It's something that a lot of us are thinking about right now.
Yeah, that's why I'm asking. It's going to be on everybody's mind sooner than we all think. So, but thank you for taking a stab at it anyway. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Eric. Appreciate you being here tonight.
Right.
Next up, we have Amanda Gunthel, followed by Timothy McClure. Amanda Gunthel? Looks like she's here.
Hi, can you hear me now?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. Good evening, Senator Fonfara, Representative Scanlon, and members of the committee. My name is Amanda Gunthel, and I'm here today on behalf of the Connecticut Association of Ambulatory Surgery Centers, and as the administrator of the Wilton Surgery Center, to oppose key provisions within House Bill 6443 that increase the tax on surgery centers by removing the $1 million exemption. I'd like to thank this committee for its ongoing support and for opposing this same proposal for the past 4 years. I know you are all in the middle of a marathon and my day starts at 4 a.m. So I'm going to take this time to review key points only, and I apologize in advance for less than eloquent delivery. This tax was passed without the benefit of a public hearing and any true understanding of the impact to our industry. We provide high quality, low cost outpatient healthcare. Medicare pays us 50% less than what they pay to a hospital for the exact same procedure. We save Connecticut patients millions of dollars each year in lower copays and deductibles. The tax costs our centers much more than 6%, as every bit of revenue that comes through the door is taxed. Each year, we face increasing costs and limited resources as reimbursements from insurance carriers stagnate or decline. Quick example. My center has not received a rate increase from our largest carrier since 2016 and won't for at least another 2 years when our current contract renews. If my rates are not going up, they are effectively going down. And most days I feel like I'm pulling a rabbit out of a hat. The COVID-19 pandemic has further challenged our centers with significant volatility in case volume and added expenses to ensure the safe provision of care and a safe environment for our teams. An administrator colleague at another surgery center in Connecticut finished 2020 with an operating loss of $350,000 and still paid $100,000 in the gross receipts tax. If this exemption was removed, that bill would have been $160,000. Who benefits when that center disappears and that access to that high quality, lower cost option goes away? In the long term, and survival aside, a declining financial performance will negatively impact a center's ability to recruit new physician partners. In turn, a lack of ASC opportunities will hinder Connecticut's ability to recruit physicians whose specialties rely heavily upon the provision of outpatient services. Throughout the pandemic, our ASCs across our state have fulfilled a critical need as hospitals were overwhelmed, patients expressed fear and concern over receiving care in a hospital setting, and families suffered devastating economic realities. The ASC tax provision included in this bill is yet another hurdle for a destabilized industry and represents a threat to our viability. If Connecticut's plan is to get back to business and help its residents thrive, as Secretary McCaw stated much earlier today, its policies should support an industry that is a model of quality and cost reduction strategy in healthcare. I urge you all to protect access to
30
high quality,
seconds,
low
30
cost
seconds.
healthcare in Connecticut surgery centers by addressing this tax with relief and supporting our opposition to this provision. Thank you very much for your consideration. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. And thank you for sticking it out with us. So question, you talk about your high quality, lower cost care. Can you give us some examples of how, what a, let's say, hip replacement would cost, or a typical procedure that might ordinarily have been done in a hospital could cost in your facility?
Like an exact rate, or
So, some
Like an
to
exam-
put some perspective on this.
okay, like a colonoscopy procedure,
Sure.
or a cataract surgery.
Yeah.
So if you had a cataract surgery at my facility, it would cost, and let's say you were a Medicare patient, it would cost you, it would cost half. We are reimbursed half, about 50%. And then so, in a commercial sense, if a patient has, their responsibility is, let's say, a 20% coinsurance, because my rate is so much less, they're paying 20% of my contracted rate, right? Which would be, let's say it's $800, and at a hospital, it's going to be, upwards of $1,600.
Sure. And as we've seen, the hospital tax is being phased out, but ambulatory surgical centers are still in the crosshairs, as it were. I'm sorry Senator Fonfara is not here, because we've had many conversations about this with him. And some of the conversations have been, obviously, Medicare patients don't pay what commercial patients do. But the willingness of ambulatory surgical centers to work to the state with dealing with some of the Medicaid patients, for example, is that something you would be willing to entertain?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. Because I think we could have an endless discussion about healthcare tonight, as Representative Scanlon knows. But in terms of providing high quality care at a lower cost, for whether you have commercial insurance, whether you're on Medicare, or whether you're on Medicaid or some sort of, state-sponsored insurance policy, is what we should be striving for, to drive down costs without sacrificing quality. And not to make an ad for you guys, but I believe that's your goal, to provide that, the same high quality care, but without the huge overheads that a hospital has to have and those additional costs. So thank you for sticking it out with us. And I think you sounded incredibly articulate for someone whose day starts at 4 a.m. So thank you so much for coming tonight. Thank you, Chair Scanlon.
Representative Devlin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm sorry to prolong your day. But
That's okay.
Could you just clarify for me, like, what this change actually means? Is there currently a tax at all? And is it more narrow? What's the change here?
The change in the provision specifically, the centers have an exemption of the first $1 million of revenue when the tax year starts in July. And so the provision in HB 6443 proposes to remove that. So because the tax is a 6% gross receipts tax, it's effectively a $60,000 increase in a center's tax liability, and it's applied to every single center.
And was there justification for providing the exemption to begin with? And was there any justification for taking the exemption away?
I'm not sure. Okay. So the first part, let me get the first part of your question.
So why was and I'm not questioning that it's right or wrong, but why was that exemption of the first $1 million put in place to begin with? Do you know?
The rationale behind it. So this tax was passed late in the session of 2015. And I actually don't have that at my fingertips, but we can absolutely get that detail out to you guys, that the rationale behind that exemption. I can follow up with you on that.
Okay. I do distinctly remember something around that time period that was intended to be a retroactive tax of 9 years for any similar type of operation that you have. And I think we were able to effectively end that. But I appreciate you explaining the difference to me. I mean, certainly that is a huge impact, and I appreciate the comments of our ranking member that also elucidated that, but I didn't understand what the difference was. So thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Meskers.
Thank you for your testimony. It's been a long day.
Hi.
Hi, sorry. I'm not sure where we're headed with this in the short term, but frankly, structurally, you're coming to me with a procedure that is half the price of a hospital procedure. And I'm wondering whether or not we should be looking at over time. I know Representative Devlin may not agree when I say the word tax, but I would argue as to whether or not we should be taxing the more expensive procedure at a higher rate than the cheaper procedure if we're trying to drive down healthcare costs, akin to what we're doing with pharmaceuticals, where we're talking now potentially in the governor's bill of pricing the hike. So if we've got competing procedures and you're doing it cheaper, if anything, I would want to encourage and drive more business there. And I would want to give you, either that same tax rate or more beneficial tax rate than I would give to a hospital in time. Now, given where we are and how long they're exempt under the agreement we've given, I'm not sure where we are in terms of the ability to make it level the playing field. But I hear your concern about losing the $1 million exemption, and we'll have to look at that, talk about the impact. But I think driving more business to people who are efficiently doing it outside the hospital system and reducing our costs should be a goal for all of us. So
Thank you. Thank you. We appreciate the support.
I even got Representative Devlin to laugh when I said tax, so that was a good issue.
Senator Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Amanda,
yes.
Are the hospitals paying taxes on the same procedure that you would be paying if this exclusion is removed?
I really can't speak to how hospital taxes are structured. It's very, very different than a surgery center. Especially if you're a non-for-profit hospital, there's a lot of exemptions that apply there, where a surgery center operates it's much more like a small business. So for us, we're actually taxed like a small business. So we pay property taxes and real estate taxes and all of the things that a hospital does not pay. And then we have this healthcare provider tax. And I wish I could give you a little more context, but I don't know enough about the structure of the hospital tax.
Well, yeah, the hospital provider tax. I think they pay 350 million based on this most recent agreement that the hospitals have made. So that's why I'm asking the question. Are you part of that hospital provider tax that they pay?
No.
So that might explain why they may be removing this $1 million. Is that making it a level playing field? We'll look into that at this end to see if that's what the rationale was behind it all. Not a question, but just a comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for your testimony.
Next up, we have Timothy McClure, followed by Susan Wharf.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Thank you for this time, far well spent. Thank you to senators, representatives, and esteemed members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is Timothy McClure. I am testifying in support of the HB 6654, an act establishing a child tax credit against the personal income tax. I'm a resident of Bridgeport, born and raised in West Haven all my life. I'm a specialist, engagement specialist, working co-facilitating and facilitating groups and activities virtually for young people. And growing up in Connecticut, seeing my father raise our family, I potentially want to have a family someday. But being very honest, I have considered many times of leaving Connecticut to live elsewhere, time and time again, because our state is so expensive to live in. From little to no affordable housing, and those that are in affordable housing, it's completely filled up, to having to pay an annual tax on my vehicle, not to mention maintenance and gas, and to even the cost of food at grocery stores, and to want to eat healthy, and just that being expensive. Everything in Connecticut is so much more expensive than neighboring states. If we were able to implement a state tax, a state level CTC, I might consider staying here, because I know that every year at tax time, some of the financial burdens of living in the state would be relieved. So I do definitely believe in this act, and I am in support of the HB 6654, an act establishing a child tax credit against the personal income tax. And thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time. And you got to stay here, man. We need our generation to stay here and make Connecticut better. So I hope you do.
Yes, and I hope we pass this this income tax. So thanks so much.
Thank you. Representative Calvaros DeGraw.
I will be brief as the hour is late, but I am just so grateful that you are here at the age, whatever age that you are, the generation that you are, because I think it's absolutely critical that we hear from you. We really haven't heard as much as I would have liked to today. And I think about, I have 3 kids, and I think about the fact that I chose to be here and raise a family here. And I say it all the time to folks in my district. We've got a lot of issues before the legislature right now that we have to figure out, or else we're going to lose all of you. And so we want you to stay here. We hope you stay here. And we hope we can make that happen for you. So thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Seeing no further questions, thanks again for being here.
Yep. Susan Wharf, followed by Meryl Gay and Robert Goodrich, and that is it. I don't know if Susan's here. Oh, here she comes.
Can you see me? I'm a little, okay. Good evening, Senator Fontara, Representative Scanlon, Senator Henry, Representative Cheeseman, and members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is Sue Wharf. I'm testifying in favor of HB 6654. And a special good evening to Senator Cohen and Representative Sean Scanlon, since they're my people. I was inspired to testify today after listening to Connecticut Voices presentation to my local Branford Rotary Club. I was disturbed by the disparities in Connecticut income tax that Voices presented to us. I'd been aware of the gross inequities in Connecticut income tax, but I was shocked after looking at the data. Connecticut's income tax is demonstrably regressive. I'm one of the many people who are willing to pay more tax to help reduce inequalities in the state, to help raise the 97,000 children out of poverty. And I raised 3 children in Brantford who all attended public school, and I'm grateful for all that the school district and the state provided to my children, helping them succeed. I want to live in a state that operates a fair tax system and tries to move towards a fairer distribution of resources. And I'm happy to help pay for that. That's it.
Hey, Sue, well, first of all, good to see you. Thank you for the brevity at this late hour. And more importantly, thank you for your support. It's really good to hear and to have it. And thank you for all you do in our community to espouse these issues and fight for these causes. So thank you. I see a fellow area representative, Senator Cohen, wants to say hello too.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just wanted to echo our chairman's comments. Thank you, Sue, for all you do and for your advocacy towards equity. Just appreciate your testimony tonight and all of your patience in sticking with us today.
And thank you for the work that you do and everybody here. I was thinking, oh my God, I'm 110. It was like, oh no. But I've learned a lot watching this and listening, and there's been some very good discussion, which clarified things for me too. I think it's been a really good process, actually. Thank you.
All right, next up we have Merrill Gay, followed by Robert Goodrich.
Good evening, Senator Fonfara, Representative Scanlon, Senator Martin, and Representative Cheeseman, members of the committee. My name is Merrill Gay, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Early Childhood Alliance. We are a statewide membership organization committed to the goal that all children are safe, healthy, and prepared to succeed in school and life. The Early Childhood Alliance supports HB 6654. Passage of this bill would create a state-level child tax credit modeled after but not tied to the federal child tax credit. Creation of this tax credit would help to make Connecticut's tax system fairer, help lift children out of poverty, and advance racial justice. Decades of research confirm the obvious. Poverty is bad for children. A 2015 report from the Urban Institute clearly showed that the more time children spend in poverty, the worse their outcomes are across nearly every domain. Compared to their peers who are never poor, the nearly 40% of children in this country who experience poverty at some point during their childhood fare worse in educational achievement, employment, teen births, and involvement in the criminal justice system. The National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine did a report commissioned by Congress, this report, that looked at approaches to reduce child poverty by half. They looked at 10 different scenarios. And the one that had the biggest impact and actually reduced poverty by half was to increase the federal child tax credit and make it refundable. So there's been a lot of talk tonight about the idea of reducing child poverty by half. And that's because it's been in the news recently in regards to the American Recovery Act. That act increased the child tax credit by $1,000, $1,600 for children under 6, but most importantly, made it refundable for the first time. So that meant that low-income families who don't pay a lot in taxes actually got money back, the same way you do with the earned income tax credit. And that means that a lot of families who were not earning enough money to pay enough taxes that they got anything back from the credit are now getting the benefit of that. That's what's really bringing lots more families out of poverty. So this tax credit is important. It doesn't bring 50% of children out of poverty. But I do want to remind you that before the pandemic, the Federal Reserve Bank did a study that found that almost 40% of households in this country don't have $400 in the bank to deal with an unexpected expense. Putting $600 in their pocket will make a big difference for lots of families. I also mentioned that this would advance racial justice, and that's because the child poverty rates in this state are dramatically different by race. Before the pandemic, 13.3% of children lived in poverty, but that's 5% of white children, 27% of Black children, and 29% of Latino children. So we have
30 seconds. 30 seconds.
We have a very big disparity, and enacting this child tax credit and making it refundable will help to reduce that dramatic difference in child poverty, help to lift the poorest children out of poverty. So we urge you to support HB 6654. Thank you.
Thank you, Merrill, for your testimony and for your advocacy for children and for this bill. You came to the very first roundtable back in January and appreciate the support. So thank you for sticking it out on a long day today for us.
I was glad that I got to say good evening instead of good morning, which I sort of wondered.
I'm glad that made you happy.
Thank you.
Any questions? Seeing none, thanks, Merrill. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Last but not least, we have Robert Goodrich.
Good evening, Representative Scanlon, esteemed members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is Robbie Goodrich. I'm the Executive Director of RACE, an education advocacy organization that fights for racial justice in our schools. I'm a father of a newborn. I'm a co-parent of a 9-year-old. I can tell you that I support the passage of HB 6654 and that it'll make Connecticut's tax system fair and advance racial justice. Now, I've submitted testimony, but I'm going to use my time today to address some of the questions regarding equity that were elevated by some of the committee members earlier in the hearing, long time ago. But first, I want to make sure that we all recognize that racism and state tax policy in the U.S. go hand in hand, and it dates back to the 1860s and follows the history of the United States and various states and here in Connecticut all the way through the Jim Crow era and now. And I can provide you exact details regarding those instances if you prefer. Now, what I'd like to be able to do as an expert in developing racial justice and racial equity plans for school districts here in the state of Connecticut, I want to remind the committee as an organization how we define racial equity. And that's the absence of predictably disparate outcomes for folks who identify as Black, Latinx, LGBTQ+, non-English speaking, differently abled, and those living in poverty. Now, there's also a difference in how we define what we believe racial equity requires. It requires the use of resources, institutions, policies, practices, and services in a myriad of ways that result in increased levels of fairness and justice for Black and brown folks. This includes the remediation of systemic harms experienced by the most underserved and underrepresented and oppressed. Should be the goal. And it should be the goal. It should be the goal of this committee and as our representatives to remediate those harms of the past. But there's something that's very clear that we have here in Connecticut that is clearly being unaddressed right now. Now, hundreds of years ago, there were very explicit ways in which tax policy was used to oppress people, and particularly Black people here in America. Today, it doesn't exist as explicit. In this case, we're one of only 2 states that don't have a refundable tax credit. So that only means so much as who it impacts.
30 seconds, sir. 30 seconds.
So here in Connecticut, we talk about the level of poverty that children experience. And Black children and Hispanic children are at 5 to 6 times the rate of their white peers. And the disparate impact is even greater based on the population numbers. What I find discomforting is that some of the committee members here have questioned some folks by using dog whistles or calls about their income or their ability to access resources. And in this case, we all should be working together to make sure that both the past harms are remediated, but that the ones that lay right in front of us right now are taken care of in a very technical, targeted way. This is not a radical idea, and this
3
full
minutes,
committee should
3
endorse
minutes.
it. I'd like to entertain some questions, as I've been here for almost 10 hours. But thank you again for allowing me the time to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Goodrich. Representative Cheeseman appears to have a question for you.
Sure. Thank you for coming tonight and sticking it out. You mentioned that Connecticut was only one of only 2 states that did not have a refundable tax credit. Were you referring to an EITC? Because my understanding is there are only, I think, another 6 states that actually offer a child tax credit.
Excuse me one second. I'll have to pull up. I believe we're one of the only states. You'll have to excuse me here for a second as I pull up the documentation. Yes, I think we're one of 2 states that don't have a refundable child tax credit.
Of the ones who offer a child tax credit, because my understanding was there are only another 6 states, or currently 6 states, that offer a child tax credit.
Well, I think it's not an either or, it's an and.
We're obviously talking at cross purposes. So my understanding was Connecticut, there are 6 other states that offer a comparable child tax credit.
Okay.
So Connecticut.
So Connecticut is one of 2 states that has both an independent state income tax, but no exemption or credit specifically designed to adjust for family size. I think that's been reiterated by dozens of people today.
All right, so
I'm not sure exactly what your
makes it
question is.
clearer, but it was not specifically geared toward those states that already offer a separate refundable child tax credit. It's the fact that Connecticut does not take into account family size when allocating its tax burden or an EITC, correct?
Well, what I also think is important, more important than that is that the impact that not having one currently has, and who it has an impact on. Not just family size, but the identities of those folks here in the state of Connecticut.
I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing. All right. Well, you had.
I think we are.
Thank you for sharing that. I thank you. You've had your obligatory question from me anyway, and I'll defer to the chair to see if anybody else has any questions. Thank you for sticking it out with us.
I do not see, Senator Miller.
Thank you, and good evening, and thank you for waiting. I guess you said 10 hours. So I have a question for you. If this bill was enacted into law, how would that impact families?
How would that impact families? I think it's, and thank you for the question, Senator. I think it offers a sense of relief, right? There's not just the financial burdens that are relieved. Maybe those be small for what some of the committee members have compared today, but there's also the emotional relief that families get to know that they'll actually have a few extra bucks in the pocket at the end of the year on each paycheck. And that has a lot of impact on the daily interaction between family members, between mothers and fathers. And that relief, and particularly where families that struggle, Black and brown families more so than whites, is extremely important to the quality of life that we're living here in our communities. And I share time between New Haven and Waterbury, so I live amongst a very diverse citizenry, both Black, white, poor, and middle class.
And I thank you for that. And so I can relate to a child living in poverty. Being the oldest of 7 children, my father was unemployed. I know what government cheese is. I know what it is to have to eat government cheese. I know what it is to have parents to have to go to welfare and get food stamps, and have those food stamp coupons. I know what it feels like to go to bed hungry and you have to eat a mayonnaise or syrup or ketchup sandwich for dinner just to have some food in your belly. And so we didn't have lunch programs like they do today. We didn't have breakfast programs like they do today. So yes, it does. It does. It relieves the financial burden of parents, but the impact that has on children just to have more. So because it's a traumatic impact. I mean, to even talk about it now, it still is emotional for me. And so that's why I support the heat programs, the heating programs. I know what it feels like to be cold. I know what it feels like to be threatened by eviction. I know what it feels like to be homeless. So these programs like this they're vital to children. Because as some of my colleagues have stated, and then it takes you out of poverty. If we can, we can finance programs like this. This is a way of making children successful. This is a way of making them successful, and then, and as someone stated too, jobs, education, all of that's important. And I could say I'm a poster child to that because of my education. It brought me out of poverty. So thank you for this. And so these stories today have been very touching, and especially the parents, the undocumented workers who pay taxes and they're not able to reap any of the benefits. And I could never understand that we know people are undocumented, we give them a number, know they're working illegally, but yet we take the monies that they get. And so again, I thank you for the work, and you and your colleagues and every individual, Children's Voices, all of that, Voices of Children, all of the organizations that they work to bring children out of poverty. So I empathize with the work that you do. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Seeing no further questions, Mr. Goodrich, thank you for being with us this evening. And thank you to everybody on the committee for sticking with us and everybody who testified today. I hope this has been a good conversation for all of you, and you all enjoyed the conversation today, and appreciate all you sticking with us as we get through this topic. So thank you. And a special shout out, as always, to Christina and Tom and the rest of the staff who do such an amazing job of running these via Zoom, which cannot be easy. So shout out to you guys, and thanks and